Hey everyone, thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Kevin Poniatowski, and I've been an application security instructor for the past 5 years, just talking to groups of developers and testers and project managers about all kinds of nasty things that can happen to their applications, and more importantly, how do we try to write the code and test the application so bad things don't happen. So I want to talk to you all tonight about integrating security into your SDLC, into all the phases of, into 4 phases of it. And I wanted to make this less a lecture and more a discussion. So please, anytime I come across a topic that interests you and you have questions, comments, or anything, please let me know. And it makes it a lot more interesting for everybody, and other than just me chatting the whole time. All right. Before I was a trainer, I was a developer for over a decade, worked for a couple of Department of Defense companies, and wrote in C, C++, VB, C#. What's interesting is I worked a lot on flight planning systems. So the pilots and navigators could bring up our software, plan out a flight before they actually got in the plane. So we're all focused on safety of flight. Very important. That's good. Never thought about security. Never talked about security. Yet, we were in very secure buildings, working on software that was going to be on all of the pilots and navigators, laptops and desktops through all 4 sections of the military. Never once talked about security. What's the name of the software again? Was it VB? Yeah, that was. Actually, we ported from C++ into a framework, and I wrote one application in C++, then 3 years later, wrote it again in VB. It was not fun, not fun. But yeah, so I got into security as a hobby because I would hear about, all the hackers have broken into this, and the hackers have done that. And I'm like, wow, I wonder how that happens. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm a developer. I should be the one who knows what's going on. And then once I got in security, I thought, well, this is a lot more fun than sitting in my cube all day. I wonder if I can talk about it. And so I've been doing it for 5 years. It's been a blast. I love it. So integrating security into your SDLC. And usually the complaints I hear about it are, we don't have the time. There's no way we can afford the tools. And we don't have the manpower to do it either. Yes?
Can I add one?
Absolutely.
We don't care.
Oh, well. I'm not in front of those groups because I get paid to go. It shows they did care.
What you hear.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it.
We don't care because they're not measured by security.
Not yet.
I'll go get the stats.
Yeah, and they're the ones who something horrible has to happen before I get called in, which usually is when I get called in. Something horrible has happened there, and they realize, oh, this was a lot more expensive to fix later. So that's an issue. So this is what we usually hear. So tonight I'm going to talk about the coding phase, design, testing, requirements, and some things we can do during those phases that are not expensive and also are not going to suck up a lot of your time either. So just things we can add kind of piecemeal into what you're already doing. And that's the goal. We want to make it as least painful as possible. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to take a little more time, but hopefully not so it breaks your budget. That's the goal. So, and you've probably heard this before, but application security is not a Band-Aid. It's not an add-on. It's not a plug-in. It's something we have to do throughout the process of the life cycle. So all the things we're going to talk about tonight are actually things you can do when you're already in that phase of the development life cycle. These are going to be in order of bang for your buck, or for the, what's the word I want? In order of how they will affect your security posture. And the very first thing is something we can do during the implementation, the coding phase, whether you're doing waterfall or agile, secure code reviews. Now this is different from a functional code review. How many of you have actually participated in code reviews before? So, about half. Good. Good. When I was a developer, by contract, we had to do 100% review of the code. So I got a lot of experience doing code reviews. And then when I got into security, I actually had a 2.5-week span where I did nothing but code reviews. I don't recommend that. That will make you go cross-eyed very quickly. But during your development phase, secure code reviews, where you're focused solely on looking for security issues. Not even thinking about functional issues or does this code match our, whatever our format that we want to have. Just focused on security issues. And the reason why, if at all possible, you want to separate it from a functional code review is because you'll find yourself looking for way too much all at once, and you're going to miss stuff. You're going to miss stuff. So if at all possible, it's nice to be able to separate them. But then we're talking about resources here. How do we do this if we have limited resources? So if you're a developer and you're working in pair programming, you already have 2 people sitting there. One person is driving, and the other person can be thinking about security. So that is something that very simple can be added in. Now, if you're working for a very large project team and you actually have a code review process, you add one more developer on the team, and when you're going to be reviewing a block of code, one of those developers just looks for security. Just looks for security. So let's talk more about this. They don't always have to be manual. You can do automated code reviews. You can do automated code reviews. So the issue with that is these tools aren't cheap. So this is for a large group, a large development group. Maybe they have in their budget, they can buy a tool like Fortify or AppScan, something like that, where you run a tool. How many people are actually doing something like this, where you're running a static code analysis? Which one are you using?
Brakeman for Ruby on Rails development.
Okay, all right. And how about you?
AppScan.
AppScan? What's your experience with AppScan?
Sometimes the results are not very useful.
Mm-hmm.
Cryptic.
Cryptic, yes. You almost have to have another skill set to be able to use the tool.
Well, as a developer, it's usually easier for me to go through it manually and find the vulnerabilities myself.
Right.
I've actually found things that AppScan missed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, that's great for all developers to be able to do that. If you know what insecure code looks like, you're going to be less likely to actually write it yourself. So these are out there. These automated tools are out there. They're usually kind of expensive. They will find your low-hanging fruit, your OWASP top 10, pretty regularly. You might have an issue with false positives, although I know over time they've been getting a lot better with that. But a false positive comes up, you still got to do the research, hunt it down, try to figure out if it's really an issue or not. And the part that really concerns me at the bottom there, they can often lead to a false sense of security. When you have a project manager who doesn't really understand what the tool does, and something like AppScan runs through it and doesn't find anything, and now that project manager is telling everybody, oh, we're totally secure. No.
What was that other one? AppScan and you said
Fortify.
Is that one?
Pardon me?
Is that for .NET?
I believe both actually work with .NET and probably other languages too. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Fortify is supposed to like 20 different languages.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. So you could have people think, oh, well, we're totally secure because Fortify didn't find anything. Well, it can only find what it knows about. It can only find what it knows about, and they're only upgraded so often.
And so they're also not going to find anything like logic flaws.
Exactly.
Things that are process-based as opposed to just raw code.
Right. Or business rule flaws, things like that.
Right. With AppScan, you can do special testing, but you have to configure the test and to tell AppScan what to look for. And if you just run it off the vanilla folder version of AppScan, they're going to find the OWASP top 10.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be a few low-hanging fruit items, but nothing really deep.
Right, right.
Why would you just, when you just want to do a manual scan, if you got to configure it so much and it's only going to get so.
Well, if a company paid a couple of grand for a license, they're going to use it.
Well, yeah, true.
It depends on how much.
Use the heck out of it.
Yeah.
It depends on how much code and how much regression.
Yep.
So if you have multiple branches coming in and you're actually merging them with other people's code, then
There are times when it makes sense.
you have to go back and I think automated really comes in when you do it continuously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have a very large code base that needs to be checked.
You push often, then if you have it run over all your code, then you don't have to wait for it.
Yep, you can do other things while that's running. Yep.
And there are some of these that actually will run within the IDE so that it won't even let you commit code back to your repository without having it been checked at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of it helps kind of with that. Just whoops, I've introduced something into the code base itself. That may not have been a good thing. So if I can set up my own set of rules for this, then we're not going to allow this, or we're going to force you to do this. It's going to let you check some of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before you're actually getting it into the actual rest of the development.
Right, right. Yep.
So we built a tool that was something in between,
Mm-hmm.
where we were doing manual reviews. What we did is we had it scan for all the APIs that were the kinds of things you wanted to look at, right? Anything that was reaching out or doing the kinds of things we consider dangerous.
Right.
We had it, and then it would run a report and say, well, these files all contain this. We could go, kind of help direct our manual review of the code.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to kind of make that where should we focus real quickly.
Right. So you got
Instead of-
and it's in this file. It's on these lines.
Absolutely.
You go in there and you can read the code and see what they're trying to do, get an idea of what's going on, as opposed to the other 4,000 lines in some files don't have anything to do with the a problem.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
One more comment.
Oh, yeah.
You don't want to always give it to the new guy because you don't want to deal with that crap because the new guy doesn't understand how the application works,
Mm-hmm.
may not be that good at coding to begin with,
Right.
not be able to figure out what the positive, false positive, and just sit there and say, well, I hit 5 that I can't figure out they're false positive, so I'm going to ignore the rest of it.
Sometimes it's
That's
actually
big a
good,
hole.
I'm always concerned about the new guy.
but sometimes it's actually very beneficial to give it to the new guy because one, they're not as intimate with it as you are, right?
If you have, if we can have multiple developers,
Through it and just throwing it out and say, go do it because I'm not going to deal with it.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen a lot. You always give it to the
An
new guy.
experience is an experience.
yeah. Yeah, if you're only going to have the new guy, new gal do this, you might be setting yourself up for failure. If you have 2 people working on it, yeah, one junior one, absolutely, but the senior one is more likely to find more nasty things.
The junior one asks the question, but nobody else thinks that.
So with the manual code review, you probably would have guessed more time consuming, but it's a great learning tool for all developers. When you see a vulnerability, you're a lot less likely to ever write it yourself, but it does take practice to become skilled. No question about it. So there is the issue. If you're just going to have the junior developer do it, your results may vary by a lot. And when you're doing manual, it's really important to set limits. So for example, in one of the DoD project groups I was working on, we had to do 100% code review. So the way we set it up was you got a chunk of 2,000 lines of code, you got 2 hours per developer. Any more than that and your eyes cross, your brain goes to sleep. So you got to limit it. You got to limit it. So there are going to be times if you're on a big project, you're not going to want to look at every single line of code. You're going to want to focus on where you think the most critical places in that code are going to be. Also, if you have the knowledge and ability to create a checklist on something like this, it's nice to have sitting right there next to you. So you already know what you're looking for. Instead of just looking at the code saying, well, let's see what pops up. If you have a checklist, number 1, no dynamic SQL queries. Right there at the top, you won't miss it. It's on your checklist. If you have a checklist of 20, 30 things, that's what you're focused on, more likely to find those instead of you just looking for whatever. I mentioned this earlier, work as a team. if you're doing some kind of agile development, paired programming, this is really cost-effective and efficient. And I really recommend prioritizing your code. Focus, because limited resources, limited time. Review your high-priority code first. You're probably saying, Kev, what is high-priority code? Glad you asked. The next slide. Any security-related functionality, your authentication, your authorization, anytime you're dealing with code with elevated privileges, when you bump up privilege because you're changing a password or something like that, that's the code I want to look at. I want to make sure that the developer set the permissions back down, or they just leave it sitting up there nice and high. Any complicated code that, obviously you wouldn't have written it yourself, because I'm sure it would be rather elegant, but there's plenty of complicated code out there. That's something we want to take a look at. Code that handles user input. That's where the attacks are coming from. So we want to make, not all of them, but sometimes they're coming to other input, but user input, absolutely. Want to take a look at that. Check out the input validation. Is it stopping everything we think it's going to be stopping? Call to database functions for the obvious SQL injection reason. Are we doing this correctly? Are we making sure we're using prepared statements or stored procedures? Are we making sure that permissions are set to a nice low level? We're not sending database error messages back up to the user.
Not embedding the password in.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially not putting it in the comment where you forget. It's on the web page as soon as you do food source.
Ta-da!
That happens so often.
Yeah, when I'm teaching, I try to impress upon everyone. The bad guys go through a process of discovery. They're going to look at everything they can about your applications. They're going to list the comments in the source of your web page.
Oh, intel analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's surprising the comments that you can find.
And the best ones usually understand the tools better than the people that are using them to develop.
No question. No question. Any code written in C and C++, that's high priority code. What's the one vulnerability that probably most people are terrified of when writing in C and C++? Buffer overflows, absolutely. So, and there we are. There can be some really tricky buffer overflows in the code that a junior developer could very easily miss. C and C++ is very easy to shoot yourself in the foot. And when I was taught it, I thought that was on a functional standpoint. It's even worse with security.
Buffer overflows, though, C and C++, we can, I'm not a C++ developer, but as far as I know, you can just avoid that by one line, right? By setting the size of the buffer, and then everything outside of that will just get dropped.
In the simple cases, yeah, but there's so many different ways you can create buffer overflows.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's using the wrong function, so it's like maybe you're supposed to pass in the number of characters or the size of the buffer, but instead you pass the number of characters.
Right. You calculate the size incorrectly, something like that, and you wouldn't think that'd be, you think that creating, figuring out the size would be really simple. It's not always that simple, depending on what you're storing. Let's see. Code written by junior developers. Take a look at it. Take a look at it. Outsourced code, big one. Big one. I always ask about this.
But that's the cheap stuff.
Yes, it is. In more ways than one. Yeah, and we have no idea who these developers are. They're probably in a country far, far away, not making much money. It probably wouldn't take, one unscrupulous developer much effort to put in a backdoor. Yes.
I was actually reading something about how they were doing a study on like a lot of free apps in the Android market that are written in Java, and they found a lot of them have like these, because basically it used to be that they just compiled code from other sources, put them together, and just said, here you go. And there were so many backdoors, and actually there were holes where basically when you activated the app, it data mine, basically. It mined it and can track things into remote server. Like,
Standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
Yes.
oh yeah, you
Click yes. Accept. Thank you. We have all your data. Except they forget to give you the pop-up saying, "Thank you. We have all your data."
Yeah.
Oh, it looks like the iTunes account.
I remember going to one talk at Black Hat, and they were the security researchers were they had bought some kind of a phishing program from obviously unscrupulous developers, and inside of that was a backdoor. So thieves stealing from thieves.
So
Some 7 had a hard-coded backdoor. Yeah, that was an old-time one. So yeah, so if you're outsourcing code, oh boy, and I do a lot of teaching in the financial area, and there's times who's outsourcing code and not looking at it. It's kind of scary.
More like who isn't look. The ones who look at it are the rare ones.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm finding, unfortunately. I am shocked that we did 100% code reviews, but it was all functional with the security. And finally, multi-threaded code, just because of the complexity. And you might just want to say, okay, what kind of sensitive data are we using here to decide whether or not do we have to look at that multi-threaded code. But if you're dealing with sensitive data, definitely worth a check. So how many have participated in security code reviews? Notice there's less hands when I asked for functional code reviews. Now, but it's been about half did functional code reviews, and half of that have done secure code reviews. But this is very, very powerful. Something we can add into our SDLC during the code, at the end of the coding phase, that we can get a lot out of. And it's not that expensive. You don't have to buy an automated tool. If you're doing code reviews already, another developer on there who's just looking for security issues. Just some review tips about doing secure code reviews. Number one, track all inputs to their source. Input validation is so important. We want to make sure we're not just, it's common if you get a block of 2,000 lines of code. Well, obviously some data comes out of there and you think, well, it's not my problem. Track it all the way back to where it comes in. Is it being validated? Input is more than just data from the GUI. And sometimes it's easy to forget about that. There's all kinds of, an XML file, that's input. Is it being validated? An environment variable, that's input. Is it being validated? Windows registry, that's input. Is it being validated? So it's not just the GUI we're concerned about. One of the things on the security code checklist, enforcing least privilege. How many of you are familiar with the principle of least privilege? Good. I like to see lots of hands with that. That's such a huge line of defense for us. Keep those permissions tight. When I was developing in C and C++ and it was all on Windows XP, what was the application running at, permission level? What was I logged in as? What was everybody logged in as? Admin, everybody. Convenient for the developer, convenient for the attacker.
If you run a Visual Studio, and you're doing a web app, and you fire up the built-in web server, it has to actually run as admin running. So usually with Visual, at least in the environment, when I worked with the last company, I had to run it as admin.
Right.
I didn't log in completely the desktop, but it was still starting out Visual Studio as admin.
But the application you're creating, hopefully, didn't need to run as admin. Yeah. And it's convenient to do that because now you don't have to worry about permissions. That's just going to run as admin, which attackers love. Security by obscurity doesn't work. I remember you thinking, I'm writing to the registry. Who's ever going to look in the registry for what I'm writing there? Every bad guy. Every bad guy. And look for, when you're doing a secure code review, look for language-specific issues. If you're writing in Java, you're concerned about the poison null byte. Java treats null bytes as just regular characters. Yet then, you're accepting file names, you're going to pass that to the operating system. Oops, because the operating system is probably going to treat null bytes as the end of strings. And that can do there's some nasty tricks that people can do with that. So yeah, look for language-specific issues. Any questions about security code reviews?
I think one comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't assume validating at the client means you're safe.
Oh. No such thing as client-side validation. No such thing. Any validation you do on the client side is for the user experience only. All validation must be done on the server side. Because hopefully you're in control of that, and if you're not, you have much bigger problems. So, but yeah, no such thing as client-side validation.
You have proxies that violate that stuff.
If I have physical access to the machine, physical access to the client, I own the client. What I want to run runs. What I don't want to run doesn't run. Just assume that. Just assume that.
And also assume it can be intercepted and modified on the network.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. Next step, design. Architecture reviews. Now, if you're going through your development process, this is something you're probably already doing. You're getting your architecture up in front of all the developers who are going to be involved in this process. So you're already doing this. Now's the time to add security. You're going to be doing this for any new projects you're working on or add-ons, some plugins or whatever that you're going to be creating for an already existing project. We can do secure architecture review. And it's important that all stakeholders are present for an architecture review. It's great to have the testers there because you're going to get a lot out of this for your testing group. So the first thing you do, draw the architecture so that everyone can see it, and then everybody argues that that's not what the architecture looks like now. That always happens. The lead architect goes up there and he draws and draws and draws and draws and then sits down and then somebody says, no. Nope, that section, that doesn't look like that anymore. And lead architect, what are you talking about? It's exactly the way I designed it. We changed it. Didn't work. So that has to happen first. You have to have that discussion so that everyone can see, okay, what is the actual state of the architecture? Once everyone gets to the point where they agree on that, then you do something fun called threat modeling. Yes?
I have a question. I don't know how it is nowadays, but I've dealt with it in the past. The software development architecture and the network architecture can be very difficult to get transitions between the two. And depending on what you're writing and where the devices are going to be, that can have a huge impact on the security and what your requirements are. So it's good to have somebody who can take what looks fine and dandy to your software people and turns it into a network diagram with this is going to be here and there, and you can put it into the network security architecture you're dealing with. I don't know how many times I have people come to me and it's like, it ain't going to work. Oh, yesterday's just this. No, you're violating policy to attempt to try to do that communication between those two devices. We have to do it this way.
And that's a great example of have all the stakeholders present. So absolutely, yeah, you want someone from the network team in there who's going to understand that. So they can say, yeah, this is great software architecture. It's not going to work when we put, the way you were thinking it's going to work when we put it on the network. So those are the kinds of things you want to get out of the way before you start talking about threat modeling. So how many of you have participated in a threat model exercise before? So, it's a lot less hands with that. Yeah, this is another very powerful technique that we can use to help us mitigate the risk of any kind of security breaches. So threat modeling is a very highly modifiable process. There's a book out there called Threat Modeling by Swiderski and Snyder that is a really comprehensive book that tells you all the cool things you can do during the threat modeling process. You can do almost none of it if you don't want to. Just depends on your project, how much time you have, how many team members you have. But there are couple of things I think are really important to do during that process, and that's what I'm going to talk about. OWASP has a great research to learn more about threat modeling on their site, and Microsoft offers a free threat modeling tool. It's free. And you have to have Microsoft Visio, though, which isn't free. And I hate Microsoft Visio. It's so frustrating to me. I've never become very good at it. But you need it when you're using the threat modeling tool. So but for free, I can't complain about the tool itself. I've gotten to play with it, and it does a lot of the work for you as far as things that make you aware of things you should be asking questions about. One of the, I think, the most fun parts of the threat modeling process is called stride. That's where you identify the threats to the architecture. This is during design time. You haven't written one line of code yet. You sit there and you brainstorm, all right, now that we know what this looks like, what are all the bad things that we think can happen to our application? So STRIDE is a acronym? Yeah, acronym. For those of you who've done threat modeling, what's the S? Spoofing. So what we're going to do, what we would do is we would think of all the horrible things that could happen, and then we categorize them. So S is for spoofing. So let's say we have an application that is a Detroit Lions discussion board. It's a website. What would be a spoofing attack against that kind of an application? What's that?
That's using a password, gets token. I'm just trying to think of.
Spoofing, faking you're one user and you're not. Right. So there's one. So all of these categories are basically going to, what's the word I want? All these categories are basically going to be all the attacks we can think of are going to fall under these.
Does that include just doing like a DNS cache poisoning and redirecting them to your own server where you have a modified version of the application of it? You know, kind of basically like a modified phishing attack.
Yeah, could be. Yep.
Speaking of like most of these things, like you have to be controlled. So if you're talking about a message board, you know, the DNS between the user, the client's computer, and your server, you might not have any control over that. There's nothing really you can do to prevent that on your server.
Because what I've seen sometimes is where if you put in a username and password, it's HTTPS, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get your token back, and then you redirect it to other resources. But you're still passing around the token, even though.
Which is basically your username and password. Yeah. It's saying you're you. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that's what Facebook got in trouble for when the Firesheep plugin came out for Firefox.
All of those were
Yeah, good times, good times.
sitting in Starbucks, basically.
Yeah, I was going to say Starbucks.
Oh, yeah, like, oh, look at this user account. Woo.
And you're logged into Facebook, and you're logged into Facebook, and you're logged into Facebook. Let's talk about that. So during this brainstorming session, and there are no dumb ideas at this point, it's just a brainstorming session. Everything you can think of is going down, and you're going to categorize it under one of these. This pretty much runs the table as far as the kinds of issues you want to be concerned about. You know, tampering. So, you know, is there any data that's being sent down to the browser that a malicious user can play around with and then send back up to you and cause something nasty to happen?
Or are you sending the price down and they can get that $500 unit for $5?
You bet.
-5.
-5 even better. That usually gets caught a lot faster. You got to try it, though. You got to try it. Anyone know what repudiation is? Yes.
So you want to, if someone says like, I swear that was not me who logged into the account, posted the message, you want to be able to have a way that you can determine if it was them or who, you have this basically a log.
Yeah.
What
yeah.
league
It wasn't me, it was my ID.
How do we prove that someone actually did cause an event to occur? And actually, that guy don't want that to happen. Information disclosure, that's obvious. Are we sending database error messages to the user? All kinds of nasty things. Denial of service. Are we concerned about that? Well, we're going to brainstorm everything and put it down. And then finally, escalation of privilege. Can a guest user become a normal user? Can a normal user become admin? That kind of a thing. So this really covers all the nasty things that can happen, and we can categorize them all. And this is just one part of the process, because now we got to figure out, all right, we got this great big list. How do we prioritize it? How do we prioritize these issues? Actually, that's what I just did. So what do we do with this list? One, that list can be turned into security test cases. That's why it's good to have your testers involved in this. They're taking notes. You don't know if that attack works unless you try it. So you're going to have a lot of test cases that come out of this process. But that can't happen, said the developer after the data breach. Did you test it? Why would we test it? It can't happen.
Yeah. But
Exactly.
it did happen.
But it did. That's how the bad guys got in. And as a developer, I have looked at tester directly in the eye, and I have said, no user will do that.
Thank you.
I have learned from the error of my ways. It's a horrible thing for a developer to tell a tester, no user will do that. That's what the attackers are going to do.
And they're users too.
Exactly. Malicious users, but they're users. Absolutely. I think the second, so that's the worst thing to say to a tester. The second worst thing a developer can say is it works on my machine.
Oh, I see some ugly stuff.
Oh, it works on
your. We don't work on it.
Yeah.
I'll say I actually had testers call me and say, how do I install this? Okay. How do I test this? It's like,
Yeah.
I just write the code. You test.
That's right. And developers may think otherwise, but we are notoriously poor testers. And the reason why is we want it to work. So we have blind spots. We want it to work. That's our job. Testers, they got to have that evil desire to break the application, because that's what we're up against. The bad guys want to do it. So the testers are the ones that have to match that evil desire to break the application before we go live.
Even if you don't have that and you are trying to figure out what you could have done wrong with your code, you have blind spots because of assumptions you make, things that you believe. It is a rare person that can build something in one shot that is near impossible for anybody to get to violate or get around.
Attackers exploit assumptions
of us. Yep. I could do something that I could not figure out how to get around. He could walk up next to me and go, idiot.
Yeah.
I'd be sitting there going, what? Shit, I didn't think about that.
It was a good idea then to not just when you're making an application or you're testing it, have at least more than one person, have a group of people look it over, do different things, compare notes. That way, at least you've had other eyes that look at it in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
When you do a secure code review, the developer who wrote the code is not one of the reviewers. They won't see it. They won't see the issue.
And the worst case is they see it but cover it up because they don't want to look like they did bad code.
That might be there too. I've been in some nasty code review meetings. What else do we do with this list of possible issues that we think our application may need to be concerned about?
Save it for next time. And add to it. An evergreen document.
It's really important to have an understanding of what are the existing countermeasures that we're going to apply in our application. We're just during the design process now. There's no code, but we know we're going to have countermeasures here. So what are the countermeasures that we know we're going to use that are going to mitigate the risk of any of this list actually working? So if we're writing to a database, we know we're concerned about a SQL injection attack. Well, we already have existing countermeasures. We're only going to use stored procedures or prepared statements. We're never going to show the user's database error messages. We're using the principle of least privilege. We have input validation. All those countermeasures, I feel pretty good about that. But there's still going to be a lot of things on your list that you may not have an existing countermeasure for. Now we come to the point where we can prioritize what's left on our list. Which one of those are a really, really, really big deal, and which aren't that big a deal at all. So here's DREAD. It's another acronym. First is D, damage. How bad would the attack be, do we think? How painful would it be to our business if this happened? Reproducibility. How easy would it be to do this attack again? Super hard? Is it a one-time thing only? Exploitability. How much work would it be for an attacker, in our best guess, to launch this attack? Super easy? Super hard? Affected users. Is it just going to affect one? Or is it going to affect all of them? Or just a certain role? Is it just attacking our admin users? And D, discoverability. How easy is this to find? And we just do our best guess. We do our best guess. Now, what we would do is, yes.
Does this take into account what your perceived adversary would be, the person that would be doing this, and also take into account the value of what is on the other side?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. That's all good information to keep in your mind while you're doing this. We would think about malicious admins, malicious users. We would think about that during this process. That's going to just make our process, our application, that more secure. If you sit there and brainstorm as much as you can, you're going to think of most of the things your attackers are doing. Never going to think of everything, because they're always coming up with new things. But you're going to think of a lot of the things. You're going to make it more difficult. Hopefully, you're going to make it so hard that they'll bother somebody else. That's the best we can do. Make it so hard, they just go bother somebody else. So the way we do this DREAD is we assign scores from 1 to 10. 1 being, like for damage. Score of 1 would be, not that much damage. 10 would be, oh crap. That would be horrible. That would be, just destroy the business. A la, what was the company in Holland, the certificate authority who, Diginotar, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Just they were in financial trouble before that happened.
Well, they didn't spend any money on security, so they can't blame it on that. So each one of these, you have a score between 1 and 10. Now, in an organization, you want to make sure anytime you do a project where you're doing this DREAD process, that you define what the scores are. Because it's really important to be able to compare one project against to another and each attack against each other too. So stay consistent with this.
Is it the stakeholders who are, are basically the financial backing internally for the application? Are they making up a large portion of this? Because, for example, as a developer, you can say, I think this would be the most important. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to,
as a developer, does they not
stakeholders internally of, they're willing to pay this much money to have this one taken care of.
Right. And as a developer, you may not have the subject matter expertise to say how much damage would that cause to us. And damage is more than money. It can also be reputation. But that's why if you have all the stakeholders there, they can say, that would be awful. Whereas developers say, well, I didn't realize that. It didn't seem that, that important to me. But you have some business people in there, and they'd be like, oh, yeah, that'd be awful. That's an 8 or a 9.
Usually when you define those, do you usually put monetary values with them? Or do you usually just say, all right, I think. I'm just trying to understand what is most commonly used.
That's very tailorable. You could do that. You don't have to. As long as every time you do it, you stay consistent. That's the important part. That's the important part.
I use this model specifically within our testing framework. This is how I actually rate discovered vulnerabilities as well. And I primarily say for us, we're using it strictly as kind of an ordinal ranking system, kind of a just as he was saying, a kind of a way to rate and rank order of remediation. So we're like, okay, these are the ones that we really are concerned about. This other stuff, not so much. And it allows us to kind of describe, when I actually deliver my report, we actually show exactly what each one of these ratings are being given, and have a short little sentence of why we're giving it that specific rating. So that kind of gives the stakeholders that we're reporting out to kind of an idea of what this actually means and what could be actually involved in some of this stuff. So
it's like 100. I mean, almost 100% of the work I do is external, right? So it's talking directly with the client versus internal. It's not. It's me. It's not really internal, right? That's why I'm trying to understand. So when I, if I sit down with somebody, it's, still from a customer's point of view, it's paying, I mean, they have to pay for whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. It's the cost versus.
Yeah, and some of that you have to tailor it, and you'll tailor it with some of the information you're getting in your requirements build out and kind of your informational pieces of what things are going on. So, like one of the things that I consider when I start talking about damage is it one of our applications that's regularly audited? Okay, so where we may find, and when you start going through a lot of external audits, they find things that are fairly easy to find, like cross-site scripting. They find a lot of it, and they tend to make a big deal about it. So we'll actually rank cross-site scripting fairly high in some places where it's not really going to be that big of a deal, like 3 layers deep within the application. You need this kind of account, you need this kind of account, because they actually may show up on an audit report, at which point the damage isn't going to be coming from the external people. It's going to be coming in the amount of grief that we're going to get from a client that's auditing our application. Okay. So the damage, and some of these ratings, they kind of go for the scope of all of your threats. So in one of our things is grief from an auditor is a threat.
Oh, yeah. So, I don't know when the attackers are coming, but auditors are really scary, and you may know when they're coming.
Right.
We're looking at effect on the process. So maybe it's not somebody getting in from the outside, but this is going to, making this kind of change is going to affect our call center volume. And they're already staffed. They're already busier than the number of people they have. And so
absolutely, yeah.
We're really looking at how it affects business processes. And a really good, having a good analyst who knows, really understands the business processes is super valuable.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, that's why this threat modeling process is so important, is because it's so tailorable. And that's what makes it, you can use it anywhere, because you can tailor it any way you need it to. So once you have a score for each one of these, you add them up. And now you compare all those scores from everything you have on your list, and that way you can see these are the ones that we need to worry about right now. Maybe these are the ones we worry about, in the next update. Maybe these ones we just kind of keep a lookout for. We don't really think there's much chance, or it's a theoretical vulnerability. No one's really, it's never been exploited in the wild kind of thing. So we just keep an eye on it. We know it's there, but we're not too worried about it. This lets us know that. It's a great way to quantify that. And like Josh said, you can show it to a non-technical group. You've got scores. They understand scores. So great process. And that threat modeling book out there, you can't forget the name. It's called Threat Modeling. I really recommend that, just because it gives you as much information as you need about this whole process.
And both Stride and Dread were actually initiatives that came out of Microsoft's SDLC process. And they've got some really nice technical pages if you just look up on Microsoft Stride for Microsoft Stride and Dread.
Mm-hmm. They've got a lot of code that they've fixed over the years.
Yeah, they should know.
They're familiar with it. Oh, we've already talked about that. Any questions about threat modeling before we move on? I really recommend that. And again, that's another thing where you're already doing design review. add this to the process. And it's tailorable, so if you have limited resources, you can figure out, what can we do here? Can we spend one more day on this? Spend it on threat modeling. If you have a small team, again, it's tailorable. You know what you've got. You can figure out what parts of the process you can use. But stride and dread, I think, are you're going to get the most bang for your buck out of those. All right, let's talk about testing. We've talked about coding. We've talked about design. Let's talk about testing. Fuzz, 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 fuzz. How many of you have been involved in doing any fuzz testing of applications? So, not that many, not that many. So this is really one of the most powerful things you can do to your application, and it's automated. It's automated. If it's input, it can be fuzz. And what I mean by fuzz is we start off with good input, and then one of the tools we're going to use starts to change that input and send it to our application. When something horrible happens in the application, the tool we use notices this, makes a little comment in the report it's creating, and then continues on. So once this tool is done running, you've got a nice list of every input that tool sent to your application where something strange happened. JRoFuzz is a fuzzing tool that is a web application fuzzer. And different fuzzing tools are good for fuzzing different protocols, different inputs. WS Fuzzer is a web service fuzzer. What do these two tools have in common? Josh? Correct, not what I'm looking for. There was OWASP projects.
Oh, yeah, there
was OWASP projects. Come on. So how much do they cost? Free!
It's a beer. Where's the beer?
Let me, bro. And there's a bunch of other free fuzzing tools out there depending on what your input is. The next XML Fuzzer. Your XML files, if your application is accepting XML files from users, that's a definite avenue of attack. There's such things as XML injection. There's XPath query injection you'd be concerned about. We have the Untidy Fuzzer. Microsoft SDL regular expression fuzzer. Regular expressions are such a powerful tool we can use for input validation. We can fuzz them. We can fuzz them. Microsoft also has a file fuzzer, and I don't know all the file formats it does, and there's so many different ones. But years ago, well, actually, I've only been doing this for 5 years, so right when I started doing this, the company I was with, we had a file fuzzing lab that we would do when I would teach, and it was always fun to throw it up against Adobe Acrobat, because we always got results. It was even fun when we taught at Adobe. About 20 minutes into it, we had two guys just run out of the room. Yep. Say, hello, buffer overflow. So it's just a great, powerful tool that we can do for all of our inputs. All of our inputs. And, I mean, there are definitely fuzzers out there you can buy. There's a lot of free ones out there, too. Another one, I think. There's another one called Sully that I've used for FTP protocol. There's just a bunch out there, and they're free, so you can check them out and see what you think. Usually with the free tools, there's a learning curve, not the best documentation, so it will take a little time to kind of get up to speed, play with it to where you can actually use it. So think about that before you just say, oh, we're going to do fuzzing here, and no one's ever used a fuzzer before. You do have to think about that. Get acquainted with the tool. Get acquainted with the tool. But it's just such a powerful testing process we can use. And there's a book out there, again, real easy to remember title. It's called Fuzzing. So anything you want to learn about fuzzing, there's a book out there for it.
Handy tip, don't fuzz production.
I'm glad you said that. Do not fuzz production.
Yeah. I have a client right now where we did load testing on production.
Oh, Jesus. There's a very fine line between load testing and fuzzing.
Yeah, testing on production. production anytime is very, very, very dangerous.
I mean, the load testing on a database service that actually was the production database because they put on the database.
Database not stat.
They wanted me to test the development app with the production database. During a load.
Yeah.
Disaster recovery exercise.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a great disaster recovery exercise.
I can do it.
You're creating a disaster. How do you recover from it?
There will be downtime. There will be an incident. And it's not tested until it's broke.
And it may be an RGE.
They must be thinking
And lastly, please sign this piece of paper.
Yes, exactly. I want signatures. From people high up, I want signatures. One of, wasn't a former coworker, but he worked at a company before I got there. Hugh Thompson, he now is like the chairman at the RSA conference. And he was flying from Amsterdam back to Boston, and after 3 hours his laptop dies. And so he's bored, and he was doing a lot of security testing then. He's like a Jedi-level tester. And, of course, he's now looking at his little entertainment screen in front of him. There's games on there.
Oh, no.
He's a security tester. He can't help himself. There's a little Tetris game on there. It was a ripoff. It wasn't called Tetris. So he plays with it for a little bit, and then he's like, I wonder if this works the way I think it does. So in the Tetris game, you have you can input a number, and that's how many blocks ahead into the future you can see, so you can plan where you put things. And so there was a text box with a number in it, and then there was a button with an up arrow and a button with a down arrow, and you were only allowed to go up to 4. So once you got to 4, that button wasn't enabled. If you went down to 1, then that button was disabled. So he's a security tester, Jedi level. He's like, how can I change this number different from these arrows? Well, this was when in the back of the seat you had the phone where you slide your credit card and talk to the ground for like $10 a minute. So he starts punching numbers on that, and lo and behold, it changes this number. So he gets it up to, it's like 6 or 7. And now this button becomes enabled again. It was enabled on 4. Since it's not 4, it's enabled. So he starts hitting the button, you know, up. And he gets to 127 and he stops. Why did he stop?
Because it changed. 1, 2, 15 at that point.
You want to see what the app would do?
No, it's 128.
Yeah, he doesn't know what the size of this variable is.
Yeah.
Could be a char. Right. So if he hits that button one more time, he causes an integer overflow. And he doesn't know if the entertainment
Don't
on the
cause
same,
production.
yeah, exactly. You see where this is going. He doesn't know if they're connected, the entertainment and the navigation system. But he's a security tester. He can't help himself. He hits the button. His screen goes black. The screen in the seat next to him goes black. Across the aisle, the screen's going black. He just like, plane stays level, which is good. Well, 5 minutes later, the entertainment system reboots itself and comes back up. So he gets back to the office and immediately writes about this in his blog, where he gets mercilessly flamed for testing on production. So that's a good lesson to learn. Don't test on production. Don't fuzz your production server. Never, never, never bad things will happen.
Did he mention which aircraft?
He may have, and the blog is still out there. Last time I looked, if you do search for Hugh Thompson, and there's a lot out there, but his blog was still there telling the whole story.
Because this has a different result on Boeing versus Airbus.
Boeing got dinged a couple of years ago. I think it was on, did they do the Dreamliner?
Well, that's Airbus.
Okay. It was one of the new ones, and it might be out by now, but their entertainment system was on the same network as navigation, and the FAA said, no, 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 you can't do that. And Boeing said, but there's no way data can go back and forth. And I'm like, did you have you test it? Because if you just having developers say that, that does not give me a warm, fuzzy feeling.
What I was making, though, is that most Boeing models don't have physical hydraulic or wire linkages for the control, whereas Airbus is all fly-by-wire software.
Oh, it's all fly-by-wire, okay.
Which is one of the problems with that from that Airbus like flight 400 or something that crashed in the Atlantic. Because the two pilots were giving conflicting. Basically, the computer was averaging the input from their.
Oh, you're kidding.
Control, and one of the guys, for whatever reason, had his pull back. So it wound up in this weird attitude. But
right.
My point was that if you did manage to crash the computers, it would flight control still be available to the flight crew.
Right. Which is good.
Yeah.
That's
not Boeing. On Airbus,
yeah. Right. Right.
So it's entertainment sensor. Something they put, so like the phone works through the entertainment system?
Yeah. Yep. I guess there were probably some games where you could, use that as
like a pet, like a
yeah.
pad or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I bet they actually had some diagnostics or stuff that they could run off the phone, or they had certain things that they wanted to do that they needed a keypad. Rather than having to have like a USB or a wireless keyboard, they just used the phone.
Yep.
I almost guarantee you
I
that
bet you're right.
going on.
I bet you're right.
If that's the way they would decide.
And they never tested this. They never tested this. So yeah, so I really recommend fuzzing. I would do the secure code reviews first. I would do the secure architecture reviews second, and then think about fuzzing. But all three are really, really powerful things we can do. And how long should I fuzz for? How much time you got? You only have 1 day? Let it run for a day. You only got 3 hours? Let it run for 3 hours. It's worth doing it. And you can do other stuff while it's running. So, and when it's finished, then you send the report back to the developers and say, here's what we found. And here's the input that we found breaks your application or does something awful to it. So, and as a developer, there's nothing worse than saying, oh, I broke the application. Well, what'd you do? I couldn't get it to happen again, but it broke.
It's a once in a lifetime thing, man.
Yeah. No, I need your inputs, and then I need to duplicate it. Then I can debug it. So, but this is perfect. You know exactly what the input was. It's going to depend on the complexity of the input, also. If it's XML files, depending on your schema, if it's PDF files, it depends. But the great thing is you can run this for how much ever time you have. And I know Microsoft and Adobe both now are fuzzing the heck out of their file formats. Any questions about fuzzing? We'll move on.
There's a lot of different, like I see Python, .NET. Is there any difference? What would be the advantage to one or the other? Just could you do people add to them or anything like that?
As far as
like I don't know.
Fuzzing or?
Yeah. Well, I feel like the Peach Fuzzer was in Python. Now it's in .NET. Is there? I don't know. Was there a reason why you choose one over another based on what it's developed in?
About what you're most comfortable with.
Probably.
Yeah. Yep.
Setting up the I know it uses some sort of use case that you develop. So I don't know if they really even need programming language.
Well, I know for Sully, because that's the one I have experience with. It was you had to write Python scripts, and I don't know Python.
Yeah.
So it was horrible. Actually, I eventually gave up. The only reason I picked Sully was because someone else one of my coworkers had done it, and he was a Python person. So I just did it because, I have somebody to ask questions to, and then finally I was like, I'm not a Python guy. I chose the wrong tool.
Yeah, a couple of them I saw were like XML documents you create to basically configure it, right? You don't really need to know
And Sully does that same thing too. It just depends on what you want to do with it.
Yeah.
What you want to do with it.
Most of these things are frameworks for testing.
Yeah.
So it's whatever you're throwing at is going to be something custom anyways.
Yeah.
You're going to have to do some kind of level of customization to do that.
That's kind of what I was wondering.
Like Kevin said.
And that's why I mentioned there is a learning curve.
Yeah.
There is a learning curve here. Don't just put it in your testing schedule and no one's ever used it before. It's going to take you a lot longer than you thought, so it's something you want to prepare ahead for. But once you learn it once, you can use it, all over the place.
Well, it's a project a week late, but we're still trying to learn the fuzzer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was trying to build a lab for a class that we were delivering in 2 weeks. Oh boy.
Didn't see much of the family or friends those 2 weeks, did you?
Well, it actually came down to, well, let's just use the fuzzing lab we already have instead of doing another one. All right. The last part of the development process I want to talk about is requirements. And this is often where we forget about security, or we just have the one requirement that this application shall be secure. Couldn't be any more vague, but management wants it to be secure. And when you get a requirement like that, developers say, okay, and just do whatever they want, or whatever they can. Yeah. Secure.
You can't have it. You can't have it secure.
Yep. No users. It's going to be really secure.
No answer.
Yeah, comment every line out.
Yeah. I just told the guy yesterday. He's like, well, how can I get around this process? I said, it's very simple. You do not have to do this process, and it will save your project a ton of money. Stop everything, because it's not going any place without this.
Mm-hmm.
You don't like that answer.
Probably not.
I finally said, you know what, that's the final answer. You're not getting anything else. I'm not wasting any more time with you.
Sometimes you got to be strong.
Hey, it's my ass if I sit there and go, oh, well, yeah, this. I've already sat there and I've told management, I said, I won't sign off on this. You want it to go through? You send me an email telling me to move it to the next step.
Mm-hmm.
I will move it to the next step. I have no problem with that, but I'm not putting my signature on it.
I'm not making that decision. Yep. That's really important as a developer. There are times when things are vague where we may be likely to do those things. Bump it up. Because, yeah, your ass may be on the line because you check in that code. We know who wrote it. It goes right back to you. You're the one that put the vulnerability in.
It's okay. I always use wolf when I do stuff like that.
One of the great things we can do when we're doing the requirements process is often during the requirements process we're creating use cases. So how about also creating abuse cases? This is fun. This is where you get to put your evil hat on and say, okay, what would I try? I kind of like with the threat modeling. We talked about how do we attack this. Same kind of thing. Describe how malicious users could attack the application. We're doing this way out in requirements. We're already thinking about all the nasty things that can be done. We haven't even designed anything yet.
Oh, great.
Again, benefits of abuse cases, lots of security tests. Lots of security tests. What's that?
Lots of fun.
Lots of fun, absolutely.
How the hell did you do that?
With magic.
You don't understand it, it is magic. So just a couple examples of abuse cases. Relative path traversal. Why input file name.txt when you can input ... file name.txt? And it's usually not file name.txt. It's,
cmd.exe?
Yeah, or what is it, msiexec.exe, all kinds of
Shadow.
shadow files that look like they're supposed to be there, but are malicious. Simple script injection. User input the single quote in all input fields. What's going to happen? So these are abuse cases. And again, we can tailor this depending on how much time we have. If we've only got half a day, we can spend that half a day creating abuse cases. You can come up with quite a few pretty quickly. And this is something that most groups aren't doing. Has anyone actually written abuse cases before?
I can't see an input without double quote.
Anymore.
Well, what's been interesting, at least from this side of the room, is I've had we talked about 4 different stages. The first one was, secure code reviews. I had how many been done a code review, half of hands went up. And through each stage, it's gotten a little less. So, this is great to do abuse cases. I'd rather, you're doing secure code reviews and secure architecture reviews and threat modeling and then do fuzzing. But again, important process we can use just to make us that a little bit better.
These are hard to sell to the business.
Mm-hmm.
Because all they really care about is their business requirements. So the tough part is reconciling the business requirements against the need to do this kind of stuff. This part is a very tough sell.
Yeah, no question. No question.
I think that some of the success comes into tying these things into how the business requirements can stay up.
Exactly.
So, especially if you have a contractual requirement within the business requirement.
Yeah.
Okay, this data can only be shared with these parties. Well, okay, if such and such were to occur, that could violate that portion of the contract and therefore cause us to lose business.
Right.
So tying those abuse cases directly into some of the actual business requirements that are there kind of makes that a little easier.
Sure.
I think the other part of it is, I've read a couple different testing books for, Microsoft tests and whatnot. And you actually, at least I've never actually seen where it says, all right, we're going to make abuse cases. It's integration testing.
Mm-hmm.
You have unit tests, but it isn't, how are we going to break that?
Right? I bet if you go to MSDN and you type in abuse cases, something will pop up, though.
Okay.
Although this is not where I was doing a little research on it today. I was looking at, I think it was one of Gary McGraw's books, where he talks about his 7 touch points of security. This is kind of where I got the ordering for these, which ones are more important than kind of working our way down. But he works for a competitor. All the prop seeking.
So abuse cases, are those usually, when they're written, are those written by the security engineers or architects, or who informs abuse cases or works on?
Really, who you got? It would be great if you have a security person involved in a project or in the requirements phase.
That's why I'm
It doesn't happen a lot, though.
asking that question.
Right.
So many times it's at the end. Yeah, it's we want to go live next week. Make it secure.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, when I worked at Raytheon, it was the testers
Mm-hmm.
that came up with the use case.
If they're in at the requirement.
Well, they are.
But in a lot of places.
With a Raytheon, no.
Yeah.
I work for the U.S. Treasury, and it's security engineers.
Mm-hmm. Good. So yeah, it depends on, again, who do you have available, how much time do you have. And there are probably plenty of times where it's developers writing the requirements, which I have been involved in, and not being a subject matter expert, which is always fun, and you're writing requirements. Like, this was for one of our flight planning systems. I'm writing requirements. I'm not a pilot. I'm not a navigator. And so during the requirements, I just set a default value for altitude. Well, 0. That sounds good. 0. Well, there are plenty, well, not plenty, but there are places in the world where 0 is really way high up in the air. Dead Sea, Death Valley. 0 was not the correct answer. I'm not a subject matter expert. Don't have me write the requirements. Or at least give me access to subject matter experts while I'm writing requirements. Along with abuse cases, the importance of clearly defining the data. For example, altitude. As a developer, I'm not a subject matter expert most of the time. I need access to business analysts who can tell me what is good data, what is invalid data. Requirements is the perfect time to have this written in stone. That way, when I'm writing regular expressions to do input validation while I'm coding, I know how to write them. I don't have to make any assumptions. Attackers abuse assumptions. So data should be clearly defined by a subject matter expert or a business analyst. And data can be very complicated. If we as developers are the ones chosen to do that, often we're going to make assumptions, and that's going to lead to bad things. So here's just some things about data we want to know. Number 1, what's the range? What's the minimum length? What's the maximum length? When I get that in, what's the reason why I need that information? What am I concerned about? What vulnerability am I concerned about? Buffer overflows. Again, yeah, they're not gone. They're not gone. If I'm a Java developer and I'm developing in the Java native interface, the JNI, I can still write a buffer overflow. If I'm using Visual Studio and I'm developing in .NET and I write on managed code, I can still create a buffer overflow. If I'm linking into ancient C++ libraries, they may have buffer overflow issues, but I'm still writing the application. I need to be concerned about them. Yeah.
Referencing our conversation that we were having before, you started talking about password length. Could that be part of the reason why then, they enforce 16-character limit on passwords?
It could be. Yeah, that's the size of the buffer they created.
Right. And you also even think about it in terms of the database table size. So let's say you've got a character space that's, let's say when they define the database schema, I'm only going to hold 50 characters in this, or I'm only going to hold 8 characters in this. So it's not just in terms of compile code with buffer overflow. You also have to figure out, well, where else during this thing may there be constraints on size data.
Sometimes that can be unique, though. So if the website says that the password length maximum is 16 characters, that's a little bit scary because it is, and a lot of times it is database column length. But if that case is well, we can only store 16 characters for your password, so it's scary because that means they're not hashing it.
Exactly.
So
they're doing it wrong.
We have a different bug. It's a more serious bug.
And if they're hashing it, they're probably not salting it.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is why HSpin fills up so quick.
So in the requirements, it's really important. I want to see the minimum length. I want to see the maximum length. As a developer, I don't want to make assumptions. What's the data type? We can put that in the requirements. This is a long. What are the acceptable values, if reasonable? If the data field is long name, not useful. Lots and lots and lots of, last names. Lots and lots of last names. If the field is the states in the U.S., then you know. So acceptable values is really important. And then number 4, from my own personal experience, what are we initializing the value to? Some languages force you to do it. Others don't force you to do it. It's just good practice anyways, even if you don't have to. What's the initialization value? Again, it's good to have someone who understands the data say, here's what we start at.
Usually they say you have 2 weeks to lash this up. What do you want? I'll make some wireframes with all kids. That's generally what it is.
Right. So, and it does, yeah, it depends on the project. It depends on your resources. What can you do? But if you're writing a requirements document, I always recommend doing that, define your data. Because if your data is not well defined, how do you do your input validation? That's your first line of defense and security is your input validation. If you don't know what good data looks like, that's going to be difficult to do well. And then if you focus on, instead of focusing on known good data, you focus on known bad data. You try to stop that. You're writing a filter or something like that. Now you have a problem because, so here's your set of known bad data that you are filtering. Okay, that's good. Except, here's the set of all bad data. And bad guys are always creating new bad data. You can never know all of it. So if you clearly define your data in your requirements document, you can do a much better job of input validation, your first line of defense, and you're not going to have to rely on filters and hope you stop things. If you're validating on known good data, you write a right expression, even if you write that incorrectly, probably good data is not going to get in, and you fix that. If you're trying to stop known bad data, you're going to fail, and unknown bad data is going to get in.
And developers like to use data in context you never originally expected.
So what story?
Not necessarily, but I mean, let's say you've got an application that your company bought from somebody 10 years ago, and it's been going around, and nobody really knows what to do with it, but it's got good data in it. So we're going to use it somehow in another application, in a context that the original data application never even was written for because that whole requirement never existed in the first place. So some of this goes back to never trust data regardless of where you get it from. But filtering for specific data that's good within the context of the application as it was originally written versus how it may be applied and adapted later on, again, comes back into what am I really expecting here versus what can I think of that may be bad.
Yeah.
So whitelisting versus blacklisting.
It is whitelisting versus blacklisting. So we're really concerned about input validation, and we're clearly we define the data, the better our input validation is going to be. Not defining the data leads to developers making assumptions about what known good data looks like. And as developers, we're good at taking things that are vague and turning them into code. That's what we do. And that is my last slide. Any questions or comments about anything we've talked about tonight?
I think like a lot of this actually would make sense for very large or long projects to implement.
Even if you're doing a 2-week sprint and you're using agile development practices, you can absolutely do this. Now, obviously, you're going to do them in much smaller pieces, but
like the fuzzing part, automated testing, I definitely think that would be a lot easier, I think, to implement. Usually I'm working with, even in the last company when I wasn't working for myself, I'm doing stuff now actually that's more defined. Before it was, because I was just being pushed a lot harder, I guess. But in the environment, it was, all right, you have until end of today to write up whatever script or whatever you need to do. That a lot of it was, Excel programming, because that's how Excel ties companies together, right? So a lot of it was that through automations and macros and those types of things. So maybe it's just general, a lot smaller set of people would actually be using that initially. But
yeah, if you're using a robust, disciplined software development lifecycle to create your applications, you can add these things in. If you're being told, here's what we need, have it done by the end of today, not a whole lot of anything you can do. Yeah. So, and that's one of the things where it's like, good luck, do your best.
But they can still be used as somewhat of a mental exercise.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They don't have to be necessarily formalized steps, but they could be areas to kind of compartmentalize specific ways of thinking as you're approaching that project. So they may not look the same as somebody within a 400-person development shop.
Right.
But
if you're a consultant, then you can use one of your this can be a product that you sell. Would be I can start out your application. I can do these things as a consultant. You can ask for sales.
And here's why it's important. And then list the reasons.
Or sell application security services.
This is code I developed yesterday. I just broke into it. What, you don't want to use me anymore? So, somewhat as an application tester, I also use pretty much this whole same process in developing and looking at applications myself. So my process is pretty much driven around a lot of the SDLC processes, but kind of turning it around and on its head. So, when I'm going to the individual groups that are controlling the applications that I'm testing, I'm going to go through and sit down. Okay, what have been your business cases? And as part of that, that's now when I'm starting to build up my use cases within my reports and within my notes. I'm going to sit down and then actually take all of that information that I pulled in and taking a look at their architectural documents, taking a look at their requirements, how the application operates, where it's fitting in with the business, what kind of data it's got in, what kind of expected use do they expect out of their actual users, and then use that to actually create a threat model. And that threat model is going to drive how I'm testing the application. So I'm not going to just go and willingly throw everything I've got at it because I've only got a certain amount of time. So I'm going to use that threat model I developed to say where are going to be the likely application, start with those, work through those things.
And really, any of the things that we've talked about, if you have an hour, you can do any of these. Now, I'd rather it be done longer, but even an hour is going to give you something. You've mitigated risk.
Have you worked with any companies or trained any companies that, a lot of, I guess, small businesses right now are doing, lean startup and minimum viable products, and they're doing a lot of A/B split tests where they'll latch something up, put it together, run, 100 people, they'll have 100 customers use this part, they'll throw out another test, where they're constantly changing, where it's, I guess, a lot less structured, where you have a lot more pivots and those types of things. Have you worked with any companies up until now, or most of the companies are?
Most of my experience with those kinds of companies, they weren't doing this at all. And then when I came and taught classes, I don't know what they did after. But some were already doing something. Okay. They had like 8 developers. And I would come in and they're like, yeah, we're doing threat modeling. I'm like, awesome. What am I going to do for another hour? You're already doing it. I don't want to talk about it. So I would say in most cases, no, it's not being done. That's one of the problems. Yeah. So we're getting a little better. Yeah.
My background's mostly, like some of Linux engineer. So I spend all my day doing some stuff. But we have an in-house development where I work, and I was wondering how much, if any, time do the OS teams need to be spending with the development teams in order to make sure, that there's, it's secure on both ends.
That's a good question, because it seems like a lot of times those two skill sets have split from each other. 25 years ago, your developers understood the operating system. They understood the network. Your network engineers understood development. But because our development environments have gotten so mature, I don't need to know anything to send data across the network. I just call it function, call it method. It just happens. So it's nice to cross-pollinate like that. It's not something you have to do on a weekly basis, I don't think, but at least it would be nice to have some, what's the word I want, milestones or mile markers where there is some kind of, okay, here's what we want to do, OS people or deployment engineers or configuration managers. Does that sound right? Kind of a thing. But
some of it goes back to making sure all those stakeholders are in that stage.
Yeah.
So as a systems engineer, you should be in on those architectural reviews, because they're going to be putting code on systems that you have to maintain and configure. And those things have to kind of marry up to really make for a secure system.
Okay. And then you can tell them, no, you can't write that interface for Internet Explorer 6. We don't run that anymore.
Right. And it's really, that's also good for system engineers, because if you're the one doing configuration on the machines, they may write a very secure application. You change one thing on your machine because you don't know their application, and all of a sudden it's insecure.
Yeah.
And all their hard work is gone for naught.
And you teach them not to hard code IP addresses. Oh my God.
I cannot say how we should run into that issue. We're through. Why the app stopped working? Well, IP address is hard-coded.
I've said that there's a special place in hell for developers who hard code.
Again, they don't understand the network.
Don't hard code anything.
Yeah, yeah.
We ran into this issue today. We have
no one will see it.
Client who has 200 sites all around the world, and we needed to add 3 more databases, because it's kind of weird how it's set up. Each database has its own IP address, even though it's all on the same bonded interface. But their solution was go ping every IP address until we find it out, because none of it's DHCP. It's all hard-coded.
That's fun. That's fun.
And then the guy that was on vacation comes back.
If you haven't done this before, and you have access to a C or C++ executable, open up a notepad. You're going to see all the hard-coded strings in there. They're not secret. Not secret. Great hacking tool, notepad. Any other questions or comments?
Only one comment. Your internal application that's never going to be used outside of the company, give it maybe 2 years nowadays.
Is web service.
I want it on my phone. I want it on my iPad.
I want to give it to my business partners.
Yes.
And it's a piece of
It's internal sale. I mean, developers Some managers that usually, much easier.
I didn't catch all that.
If you go internally and you talk to managers in the firm, say if you're a developer in a team, you're not doing it in a team and you actually want to go and sell it, to start being able to use it in the team, is that usually, you find it's usually a difficult sale to get people's buy-in, and I know it's different based on every person.
Right.
And I'm just curious what if there's any trends or.
It has to be top down.
Okay.
Somebody very high level has to be terrified enough to make it a priority. When you try to do bottom up, you usually don't go very far because the project managers are focused on deadlines and functionality. That's usually the way I've seen it work, at least.
And nobody cares about something unless they're being measured on it.
Yep.
They're being measured on how quick, how profitable, how we're efficient, not how secure.
Right. So, but when you get a CTO who says, we're going to be secure, or Bill Gates writes an email to everyone in Microsoft and said, security is #1, top down. Right. But most places, we don't see that yet.
Could you sell it on compliance on it for anything? I don't know if this ever applies to any compliance. Audit mandates.
Yeah, audit.
PCI.
PCI, yeah.
Oh, code reviews and stuff,
PCI is a big hammer. HIPAA?
Yep.
HIPAA required code reviews. I don't know.
Like if you can just make a case saying, well, we can't afford this. I was talking with a couple people who used to work at banks where I work with right now. They said, it would surprise you how unsecure they are just because they say we can't afford it, and the auditors check a box and they say fine.
Yeah. Or they say, well, we're PCI compliant. They think that's the ceiling of security. It's the floor. You've done the least amount possible to be compliant. But people think of it as like, ooh, we're really high. Oh.
Yeah, I think the problem with compliance-driven security is compliance usually amounts to people are going to do CDED minimum.
Yeah.
So that they can
the
have the
checkbox
conversation
mentality.
with the auditor or whomever.
Sometimes you could sell it as a compliance objective, as an additional.
I worked at a bank, and if it didn't go through a firewall, it didn't go to security. So it was an internal app, or at least an internal, it could be across the WAN, it didn't matter, right? But it was still, if it didn't go to a customer, it never went to security.
Oh, sensitive data going across internal networks and plain text. That's exciting.
Did you ever get a virus on your computer?
There's a financial institution that I will not bank with. I've seen the inside of what they do. And I said, you can't do this because that is it. Oh, yeah, we can. We turned that off because it broke things. I went, what? We turned that off, it broke things.
Hey, security measures are linking in the way.
There people only say no, they never say yes.
Yeah. But we're sending that in plain text, but it's going across the lease line. Do you know everyone who works for that company that you rent the lease line from? Do you trust all of them to not install a sniffer on there? Oh, crap.
Has somebody encrypt a password, send it to me, just so I can embed it in a URL going HTTP.
Well, like, here's the encrypted file. Here's the password.
Yeah.
Or the best one I ever got. This is physical as well. I received on my desk 2 packages. One package had the login information. The other one had the RSA token. Shipped from the same location to the same location the same day.
Yeah,
Same company, the same service.
Oh, wait a minute.
And you know
It's
what?
not even security theater.
What the best thing is, I think it actually got fixed. What? Because it was probably about 1 a.m. in a party in Vegas where I was telling this story, and I mentioned the company name, and one guy said, whoa, wait a minute, what did you just say? He came back 20 minutes later and said it will never, ever happen again. And it was over a year after it happened. I just happened to be at the right party, telling the story.
You're at every party.
How can you get the wrong party?
I was at every party.
You're at every party.
Just because I was at more parties than you.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't have any other questions, thank you very much for coming out tonight. I really